So I'm going to talk a little bit about Prader-Willi syndrome and really focus on the behavioral features of PWS, kind of what works, why, what we know, and tell you a little bit about our background, what we do, and kind of how long we've been studying people with Prader-Willi syndrome. So basically, I've been studying people with Prader-Willi syndrome since 1995, and I work with Elizabeth Dykens, who's been working with people with PWS for about the same amount of time, even closer to 30 years. And so I've evaluated more than 325 individuals. We see them every 2 years. And so they come back kind of time after time so we can see how things change and develop. And I actually consult with several large PWS residential facilities here in the States and in Australia. So the idea that we can kind of help people manage programming and educational issues and things like that. And we produced 3 training videos for PWSA, for the International PWSO Conference, and then for FPWR, for staff, for parents, and actually for teachers. And so should you want to look at any of those videos, they're pretty easy to find. If you do my name and PWS, they'll come up. So I'm happy for you guys to take a look at that. And some of the things in those videos I'll be talking a little bit about today, because I think it's important for parents and caregivers and other folks to kind of know the best ways to manage some of the aspects of PWS. So I think it's really important to know that basically there isn't one size fits all. Not everybody with PWS is the same. And so I often have parents who ask about other kids that they know are with PWS. The reality is there's no kind of one, everyone is the same. So you have to really know there's a lot of variety, just like autism spectrum disorder. PWS is a spectrum, right? So people can be very mildly affected. They can be more severely affected. Some have more food issues. Others have more behavior issues. Don't look at another kid with PWS and go, oh, so this is what I should expect, because the reality is there's just a lot of variety. If you meet one person with PWS, you've met one person with PWS. So it's important to kind of know that those things will be kind of different for each person, and it depends a lot on how people manage it and even the genetics. So, and to know that environment and staff dynamics can really influence how PWS presents. So if people often give in or often just kind of don't want to argue or fight with their kid and they just go, oh, I'll just let this go or whatever. Sometimes we see kids who are 7, 8, 9 who really are struggling because parents are just unwilling to put up limits because it's just hard. And I'm not talking about food limits. So people are really good with that. They're like, I'll lock up the food. I'll do those things. But it's really more the other things about kind of like giving your kid a structure and letting them know that you're a consistent person who does the same thing every time. Because when you start, so the genes that affect PWS, we talk a lot about the, kind of what happens in PWS, but I like to kind of describe it like this. So the genes that are missing or imprinted and not working kind of thing, the thing that actually happens is they change how the hypothalamus works, which is deep inside the brain. And so the hypothalamus works on temperature, eating, sleep, growth, and also sex hormones. So the reality is it does all these things, and people talk a lot about the eating behaviors, but it affects many more things than that. And so we have to focus on kind of the whole picture here. It can also cause neurochemicals and neuropeptides to work differently. And some of the ones we know that work differently in PWS are serotonin, which affects mood. And it also kind of keeps people kind of soothed and on an even keel. Ghrelin, which is actually kind of implicated in eating behavior. So people with PWS have incredibly high levels of ghrelin, and ghrelin actually makes you hungry. And so the idea is if you have these high levels, you're very hungry. We've worked with several drugs trying to lower ghrelin levels. We haven't found anything that seems to make much of a difference. And if you have a stomach bypass or a sleeve or anything like that, those kinds of like gastric surgeries to help with people who are just normally obese, not with PWS, it lowers ghrelin. We don't know why ghrelin is so high. And again, drugs targeting that are a big kind of like boom for people with PWS. There's some hope that if we could lower ghrelin, we could lower their hunger. And another one is oxytocin. And oxytocin is what people call the love hormone, right? So oxytocin is expressed in everyone. And once you have a baby, your oxytocin levels go really high so that you bond with that baby and you love that baby and you take care of them. And so they call it like a trust hormone. And so the idea is it's kind of simplified, but people with PWS seem to have odd levels of oxytocin. So if we give them oxytocin, sometimes they actually become a little bit more normalized, a little less irritable, a little easier to kind of redirect, things like that. And so here in the States, there's a couple of drugs where people are working specifically on oxytocin, and there's several folks who are studying knockout mice and other kinds of models to figure out what is wrong with oxytocin in people with PWS and how to kind of rescue it and salvage it. The other thing that the hypothalamus does is because it's very close to the amygdala, which is kind of your emotion center, it can cause rages, outbursts, and mood swings. And so not bipolar per se, but this idea that they just seem to have this more intense reaction to things. So things that should be pretty minor, they may see as huge, big issues. So I think it's really important for us to kind of know that we're not talking about a mood disorder per se. We're talking about a low level kind of just, mood dysregulation. They very quickly go from being okay to not okay. And sometimes you don't even know what the trigger is. So I think it's important to know that some of those things are deep brain-based things. And we'll talk about a couple things that we do know as far as those things go and kind of what you can do and how you can head it off. So how does PWS fit together? There's varying amounts of different features. And so we have things like anxiety and definitely stubbornness. That is definitely part of PWS. Being stuck on things, kind of get past it, worried, argumentative, angry, hungry, and insistence on sameness. So I need things to be the same every day. I insist on it. I require it. And if things don't happen the way I think they're supposed to, I get very angry and very upset. So again, environment and family and school can change the picture. It's really important to know that even though these things are genetic, they are not set in stone. What you do with them tells a lot about how your kid will actually be. And if your kid is a grown-up, they can still change. We've seen dramatic change in adults with PWS with the right programming, with the right kinds of environmental things put in place. Skip that one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about family and kind of this idea of what goes on with family. And one thing that we found is that if mom has some depression and anxiety, which is pretty common for parents who have a kid with a disability, right, is that predicted more behavior problems for their kids. So this idea is, and I tell people this all the time, you got to take care of yourself. So this idea that you're focused all on your kid, and I have people who come to me who are so into, well, what can I do? What's the next thing I can kind of work on? And I'm sometimes like, why don't you focus on yourself? Are you sleeping? Are you eating right? Are you exercising? Are you managing your stress? Are you doing the things you need to do to take care of you? And I tell people all the time, this is a marathon. I have people who have 5-year-olds who are just exhausted. I'm like, right. So they're going to, be around for a long time. So you have to find a way to take care of yourself. So it's important to know that your mental health is just, if not more important than your kid's mental health. So again, this idea that you got to take care of yourself. When you get on a plane, they say, if the cabin were to lose pressure, if the oxygen mask drops from the ceiling, you put your oxygen mask first, then you help your kid put their oxygen mask on. You have to take care of yourself, and you got to practice self-care. What that looks like is entirely up to you. People say, well, what should I do? I don't know. You have to find the thing that works for you. I personally like to watch things that are funny, and I like to laugh. And so that's a huge stress reliever for me. And with the pandemic, I'm certainly cut off from a lot of my friends and coworkers and everything else. You got to find ways to connect, to kind of meet your, kind of manage your stress level, and to make sure you're sleeping, eating, and exercising. So, and if you tell me you don't have time for that, then you need to cut back on maybe some of the stuff you do for your kid, because you need to focus on yourself sometimes too and really take care of yourself. We'll talk a little bit about some of the subtype differences. People talk a lot about PWS, and they kind of say, oh, and I always say, what's their subtype? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, it's important to actually know that. What we do know is there's definitely some differences in these two groups. And so if you have a deletion, which is the more common type of PWS, where you have a little small piece of chromosome 15 missing, 70% of cases of PWS have this. You have more skin picking often, very good at puzzles, good with directions and memory. People with PWS with a deletion can remember places they've been. They have an incredibly good visual memory. And even for directions, we've had little children who don't even see out the windows because they're so small. They know where they are based on the patterns of the trees and the leaves and the other things that they see from like just the periphery, where they are. We're amazed at that. So there's definitely a real strength there. We also find that behavior seems to mellow as they age, and people are like, "What is that age? When does that happen?" And it's in like the late 20s, so it's for some people it's a little bit of a wait. But it's important to kind of know that we do have people with deletions who do seem to mellow. They get better, behavior problems go down kind of exponentially, and they're much easier to redirect. Doesn't mean they don't have PWS anymore. It just means that things seem easier to redirect, a little bit easier to manage. And in this group, food issues are usually bigger than behavior issues, right? They're more driven by food than they are like anxiety and worry and things like that. But if you have the uniparental disomy or imprinting mutation, and even though these are two separate things, for some reason, the way that they kind of work, they basically, the symptoms pretty much mimic each other. And the imprinting mutation is notable in the fact that if you have a kid with PWS, you have one kid with PWS. If your child has an imprinting mutation, you have a 50-50 shot every time you have a child of having another child with PWS. And so they used to tell people, oh, you never have another kid with that. But knowing that your kid has an imprinting mutation, and it's very rare, like less than 5% of all cases, means that you could have more. So it's important to kind of know what the subtype is, because this to me is your roadmap of what you need to kind of work on the most versus things that you don't need to worry about. For people with UPD, sometimes they have more autism features, and it's not that they're not social, it's just that they're kind of scripted. They're kind of rote and they do things kind of over and over. They definitely have better verbal skills. So often they are very chatty, sometimes argumentative. They're all born to be lawyers. They get more stuck. They're argumentative. Psychotic risk is higher in this group, and there's also a higher risk of psychiatric features like depression and anxiety. But they seem to gain skills as they age. So as they get older, it's kind of interesting to watch. They still get better. They learn more things. I have actually a couple folks that are actually in their late 20s who are taking college classes and things like that. And in this case, behavior issues are usually bigger than food issues. Now, when I say all these things, just know this is what we generally find. Your kid may differ. So it's important to know that this isn't true for everyone, but this is what we generally find in these two groups of people. So anxiety is a big problem in PWS. About 40% of younger kids report anxiety much more of a problem than hyperphagia. Anxiety can be way more disruptive than hyperphagia, right? You can lock up the food. You can't lock up all the things that your kid is stuck on and worries about and needs to, have happen a certain way. So it's important to kind of know that for some folks, younger kids, when hyperphagia hasn't developed, anxiety is a much bigger piece. Anxiety can make everything take longer, right? Getting ready for school, family outings, even new fun things to do that stresses them out. They have so many questions. Bedtime, bath time, all those can be times for anxiety to really kind of rear its head. It's also hard to treat, as many typical anxiety meds don't work as well for kids with PWS. And most kids with PWS develop anxiety sometimes as young as 2 and 3. So it's important to know that if anxiety is an issue for your child, you're not the only person. Many people are struggling with that. And then thinking about structuring with some flexibility is a really important way to manage anxiety. Don't do everything they want to the way they want to, because then you will be stuck there. But having a general structure that your kid can rely on is important, because they start to realize, oh, the world does seem to be more predictable than I thought. So what does anxiety in PWS look like? It's certainly not like it would look like in a typical person. It can look like worry. It's often a constant need for reassurance. When will dad come home? When will this happen? When will we be eating? When will, what was, and then why? Why are we doing it this way? Why is this, so it's this idea they constantly need you to tell them they need to control situations. They need to control other people. They initially push back at new situations. So novel new situations are seen very negatively initially. And then sometimes they get better. And then there's often talks about schedules and expectations. What's going to happen? When is it going to happen? Give me more information. And even when they know that information, they will continue to ask you. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Transitions from one activity to another are very hard for them. Once they're doing a thing, it is hard to move them to another thing. So again, if there's some physical agitation, sometimes rocking, rubbing, hand things, whatever else, and you can tell your kid's getting agitated, that is where worry sometimes manifests in a way that you can see it. How do you deal with it? Visual schedules, mentally prepare them for events. Here's kind of how the day's going. You don't need to give them times. They don't have any concept of time. So all you have to say is this will happen before this. You can compartmentalize it. You can kind of say, I'm not going to give them too much information. I'm not going to, tell them about the entire day because that's just too much for them to deal with. So I deal with a little small part of it. And we had a young man who was really focused on other people, like what they were doing and what they were not doing. And what for him is we put a suggestion box on his desk where he would, basically tell them other people and write these long, copious notes about infractions he'd seen them do at school. He'd fold them up and he'd put in the box. And once he did that, he could kind of take it out of his mind, throw it in the box, and it really literally compartmentalized his worry. You can kind of come up with rituals to manage. Can you do some deep breathing? What things work? And you'll have to try lots of things to figure out what works for your kid. I'm a big believer that just sometimes saying, it's going to be okay, or come up with a thing that works for your family. I got this. You don't need to worry because mama's got this. So coming up with ways to kind of get them to know that they don't need to focus on it, you got it, is really important. Limiting questions to 3. So don't let them continue to ask. You answer it 3 times and you go, sorry, I'm done. 3 times, remember, that's the rule. And so it's important for you to actually limit because they often can't. Baby steps for change. So we used to always tell people that you do the same thing, you do it every day, you never change, you do it always the same, because people with PWS get upset. Well, I've seen those people as adults, and yeah, they get upset about absolutely everything. So it's important to know that small baby steps, they can accommodate change if you give them a heads up. And you might say, well, the weather is bad, or this is going on. So it's important to kind of say, these things are happening. I don't control them. You don't control them. We have to roll with the punches here. So do those things and you'll find that your kid is doing better when it comes to dealing with just day-to-day changes. Big fan of visual schedules. Stickers, pictures, doesn't matter how you describe it. Like, how do you get ready for school? What are all the things that I need you to do? It gives them a way to move forward, right? So they know what's the next step because they see it on the picture. It gives them the steps in order. It's a concrete reminder. It gives them a sense of accomplishment. Even adults will put stickers in those like little slots and they know when something's done. They don't have to keep going back and going, did I brush my teeth? Did I do this thing? And you can, when they ask you lots of questions, refer to the schedule. What's number 2 on the schedule? Well, to use the bathroom. Great. Have you done that? Okay. So it helps them move on. When anxiety leads to tears, which it often does for people with PWS, they get so anxious that they just can't manage anymore, and they will often get tearful. So I tell people all the time, it's okay. Tears are okay. They kind of reset your kid. When you have a good cry, you cry it out, you get over it, and then okay, I'm all right. It really does reset them. Give them a safe place to vent and talk about it. Be empathic. Validate feelings. You don't have to say that, whatever thing that they're worried about is, important, because it's sometimes not, but it's important to say, I know you're upset about that. And that's all I would say. I know you're upset about that. I'm really sorry. But it's not like I'm going to do something differently next time. I'm going to change it. It's just, yeah, I know this is hard. Give them time to get over it. People who have a schedule and they want to rush through things, people with PWS can't really be rushed very much. So it's important if you set that schedule up that they know what's coming, they know what's going to happen, and you give them some time to kind of go, okay, that's what's going to happen next. And know that tears are better than anger. If we don't let them kind of cry it out, sometimes it leads to aggression. And I'm going to talk about that next. So questions, driving you crazy. So questions for people with PWS are a way for them to process stressful events. They can be the best events ever. They could be doing something incredibly fun. But the problem is it's stressful because they don't know exactly what's going to happen, when's there going to be a snack, lunch. I need to know all these things. And so it's important for you to know that questions can become a compulsive behavior. They need to ask, and as long as you answer, they're going to continue to ask. So it's fine to say, well, I've answered your question. I've answered it. Yeah, answered it. You ask them the question, what time are we doing lunch? Yeah, you're right, 11:30, that's it. Limit responses. Again, 3, that's all you need to do. And if they're old enough and you can write down the response, what do we write down on the schedule? What's on that note? Okay, great. We don't need to keep talking about it. So you have to stop the questions. Oppositional behavior is really common in people with PWS, so they have to say no before they say yes. It could be something great, but they're like, I don't know. So again, it's that transition thing. It's the idea that I'm worried about this thing, and my initial pushback is always going to be, I don't think I want to do that, even if it's great. So it's not about you. Don't personalize it. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them. Give them two choices so they don't get stuck. So do you want to do this or do you want to do that? And they're like, oh, okay. So if you say we only can do this, you're only going to want to do this other thing. So try to find ways to say yes. I have kids that often ask me, well, I'm ready for lunch. And I'm like, oh gosh, it's only 8:30. We got hours before lunch and lots of testing to do. And I'll be like, oh yeah, me too. But it's only 8:30 and we just ate breakfast and we eat lunch at 11:30 here. So I also am going to eat lunch. What are you going to have for lunch? Okay, well, let's get all this stuff done because that sounds like a great lunch and you would definitely not want to miss that. So don't also ask a question you don't want no for an answer. Do you want to put on your shoes? Do you want to make up your bed? Do you want to get your book bag ready? The answer is always going to be no. So you say stuff like, let's get on our shoes so that we can eat breakfast. Let's pack our book bag so we can have a snack. Anything that you can get them to kind of move along with. An idea of cooperative statements lead to agreement. So this idea that I'm not asking you, we're gonna do this thing. So it's important for them to know that it's part of the idea that it's cooperative, not oppositional. If aggression does start, usually it's yelling, sometimes it's throwing things, it's, and again, if they're breaking stuff, you need to kind of think about your house and what you need to do to kind of, just like with small children, what you need to do to kind of keep things safe. Sometimes they'll swing out at people, not generally trying to hit you, just want to it's a warning shot. Don't get too close. Allow them space to vent. The worst thing you can do is get in their face and go, what is wrong? Oh, like, nope. Just kind of go, well, I'm sorry. I see you're upset. So I'll just, I gotta get that. You just let me know when you're better. We'll get back to it. And literally give them no attention. Validate emotions, not behavior. It's okay to feel upset or sad or disappointed or angry. Any of those emotions are fine. The behaviors of hitting, swinging, breaking things, those are not. And so I think it's important for us not to think, well, my kid has done something where they've broken something or hurt somebody, and to kind of go, well, they have Prader-Willi. No, that's not okay. If you start to validate that behavior, I can tell you it will escalate and only get worse. The other thing is the kind of talking too much and trying to make big teachable moments or whatever else. Don't do those things. When your kid is aggressive or upset, the worst thing you can do is go, well, Johnny, what could we have done different next time? No, don't do that. And develop a safety plan before aggression starts. So what you want to do is make sure that the breakables and the whatever, and your kid's in a relatively safe place if you can. And I'll talk a little bit about when you can't, what you can do there. So when people shut down, it means emotions are too high. They're just too much for them to deal with. It often seems like nobody's at home. They'll get very upset. You call their name. They're no longer like being aggressive. They're no longer yelling. They're just kind of in a puddle in the floor, just kind of upset. Sometimes it seems like nobody's at home. They won't respond. They collapse on the floor. Leave them alone. Give them no attention. I just say, oh, obviously you're upset. Well, okay. And I just basically do something else. If you feel like for safety, you need to kind of stay in the room, you can scroll through your phone, you can doodle a list, whatever, but it has to look like you really aren't involved in this. And if in public, make sure they're safe and monitor. But again, trying to move them, I have people who try to put their kid in timeout or whatever, and they're dragging them. I'm like, no, the minute you have to lay hands on somebody to get them to do something, it's not a good idea. So even if they shut down in a restaurant, and yes, it's totally embarrassing. I have been at more conferences where I've seen parents go, I'm so sorry my kid is doing this. And I'm always like, oh, I do this every day. It's all good. You're not bothering me a bit. So again, find a safe place where if they need to shut down and that's going to happen, that you can manage it safely. But the bigger is trying to get it to kind of stop it before it happens, because once it goes that way, it's almost impossible to stop it. Being proactive and not reactive is really important. So thinking about having a plan, prepare for the unexpected, because promise you it's going to happen, and then have a backup plan. Be clear about expectations. Have your child repeat them to you. This is really big for family gatherings or events where if things go bad, and follow the plan and execute it to a T. If you tell your child that if you have a meltdown about what you're having for dinner at this place, then we're going to leave, well, you better leave. So if they do that, it's really important that you follow through and do the consequences. And people go, but I was having a lovely dinner. I'm like, yeah, I know. But once you do it once or twice, your kid's going to go, oh, so this is what happens. Don't be rattled by argument or negotiation. And the idea is how can they can control their emotions if you can't control yours? So it's always important that, you just got to have to kind of keep it together and be like, okay, well, and act like it's no big deal, because if you get upset, they're going to match yours and far surpass you when it comes to their emotions. So I think it's important to kind of know that negotiating is a little bit like, somebody who's taken a bunch of people hostage, right? So the idea is that if we have people who are trying to negotiate, try to get more, try to get something different, you are starting to go down a path where you're never going to kind of get back from that. Because once your kid knows that you're willing to engage and play their game, they're going to play it. And I'm not kidding when I say, no matter how good you are, they're better than you. So be clear about expectations. Maybe even get them in writing if you can do that. Don't do things on the fly. Don't think that you can figure out things. You have to have a situation, a plan, and know what's going to happen. Use a calm and bright affect. If argument starts, do not engage. Doesn't matter how mad your kid gets. You just like, okay. So I think it's important to kind of know that the negotiating and arguing can really lead you down a path where it's hard to get back from. It's so important to think about tone. So how you pitch things to people with PWS. And my dad always wanted me to go into sales, right? That's what he did. And he's like, you would be a great salesman. And I told him, I am a salesman. I sell people all the time on things they don't really want to do, but will do because I put it in the right way. Think about your audience. Who are you talking to? Think about your affect. You really have to watch your face, because people with PWS are very tuned into how you look, the tone of your voice. What's your pitch? What's in it for them? What do you want? How can we get everybody some of what they want? And realize less is more. Less talking means that you can actually sometimes come up with a way to actually deal with things in a much more productive way. Some of the personal characteristics that fit well with PWS: easygoing, you got to be patient, being flexible, creative, being emotionally secure and stable. So not letting things that happen with them rattle you. And don't get me wrong, as a parent, that's going to happen. But they're knowing that is not something that they need to know. Be a problem solver. We often talk about not like bad behavior or problem. How do we solve this problem? Being calm, being confident, and also being able to consistently reward behavior. Catch them when they're being good, comment when they're being good, and don't just interact with them when they're being bad, which is what a lot of people end up doing, because they're like, as long as they're doing great, why do I get involved? Flip that so that you're all involved when they're being great and not involved when they're not. So as far as programming, this is true of adults, is you have to have trust. So people with PWS are pretty skeptical, and they're going to test you until you pass. So basically they're going to keep going, if I do this, what will they do? If this happens, what will they do? You have to do what you say you're going to do. So you have to follow through, and then make the day filled with purpose and activity. Being idle often leads to behavior issues, and start with lots of structure and supervision. You can always ease off on that, but it's hard to put it back in place when you haven't had it. Downtime is don't time. People talk a lot about, well, I need a break and I need some downtime. I don't need to be scheduled or whatever else. People with PWS do not feel that way. So you will help them manage issues. You'll be managing issues if they're not busy. You're going to need to help them come up with schedules and structure when things aren't. If they're sleeping all day and up all night, again, more behavior issues. And again, structure is kind of the key to their day. It's really important for them to know that what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, so that they get, oh, so this is how things are going to be. Your job is to find a way to say yes. Again, like a good flight attendant, right? So they're always, oh, yes, absolutely, we can do this. Oh, sure. So you have to sometimes pretend that you got things under control, even if you really don't. So it's really important for you to kind of find a way to say yes. No generally gets such a negative reaction for people with PWS. You can say yes often in a way that I just almost never use the word no, or we're not going to do that. I just don't do it. So when I say yes, I'm excited about doing this thing, and they're kind of like, wait a minute, okay, she seems excited. You're always selling them, always trying to move them along by trying to help them not get stuck. Being a yes man is not a bad thing. But being a maybe person is the worst, right? So you don't want to be the person. I have people all the time. The kid will go, so what are we going to do? What can I do this thing? And the mom will be like, oh, well, maybe let me think about it. And then 3 hours of meltdown later, they're finally saying yes. You would have saved everybody a lot of time if you know you're going to give in, just give in from the very beginning instead of all the negotiation and escalating of behavior. So again, kids with PWS can't handle maybe. I'm thinking about it. We'll talk about it later. They're like, no. So you make a decision, live with it, and move on, because honestly, it will take so much less time and your kid will go, oh, they made a decision, we can move on. Know that you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if your kid is having a problem at school or in a group or whatever else, and it's only one teacher and one class and whatever else, I can tell you that person is doing something to set your kid off. So identify the person, figure out what the problem is, and see if you can fix it. And if you can, I've had people who've actually changed teachers or classrooms, because sometimes people with very authoritarian, kind of like rigid personalities, they can't work with people with PWS. They basically say, well, I do it this way, and your kid by the end of this year will learn this thing and they will do it. And I'm like, really? Because that doesn't sound realistic. I've been doing this 25 years, and people with PWS can wear you down. So the idea is figure out what the deal is and see if you can manage it and fix it. And it's okay if the teacher doesn't like you. They don't have to live with you, but your kid does. So what works for people with PWS? So allow them to calm down. Don't demand it. Don't kind of rush them through it. Just let them calm down. I will tell you, if you allow them time to calm down, they often get it together way faster than they will if you huddle over them and keep talking to them about it. Let them decide when they're ready to return to the situation. Give them some level of control. And I often say, let me know when you're feeling better or when you want to get back to it. And I just literally act like nothing's going on, even when sometimes it's a disaster. When they often will go, okay, I'm ready to go. Great. We don't have to rehash it. I don't demand an apology. Them saying stuff like, I'm sorry, it doesn't make me feel any better. It certainly doesn't make them feel better. So why don't we just let that go? And basically I'll say, great, I am so excited that we get to do this thing again, or we were going to do whatever. You want to return to balance. You don't have to be right, because you being right means they have to be wrong. So realize that it takes a lot of humiliation for them, and they're going to often take it out on you. So just don't be that person. Just be the bigger person. What doesn't work for people with PWS? Yelling at them. Do not raise your voice. Don't argue with them. Don't be sarcastic. Don't make fun of them to try to get them to see your side. Some kids with PWS can take that. If there's a very trusting relationship, you can sometimes make fun. I often tease them about things that I know they know I'm teasing about, and they're totally good. But it's often people I've known for many years, and so they get that when I have a little cute nickname for them and they have a nickname. It's like all that is great. But if you don't know them and they don't know you and they don't trust you, doing those things often leads to an argument and sometimes aggression. Trying to get them to give in, give them choices, help them move along. Don't try to get them to fold, because if you do, again, they will often think, wait a minute, I've been duped. And that makes them feel humiliated and embarrassed. Try to reason with them when they're upset, when they're crying or upset or laying on the floor. There's no need to have a conversation. I had a young lady who kept rolling around in the floor of the lobby of my building. She was upset about something about lunch. Don't even know what it was. Didn't really matter. And the mom said, see, this is what I'm dealing with, like 10 times a day. The girl was just rolling around the floor. And I said, we're going to lunch. So love for you to join us, but I get it. You're hanging out here. And I stepped over her, walked out the front door, and within seconds, she was right behind me, drying her tears. Everything was better. And I took the mom. I said, you cannot let her hold you hostage. You have to find a way to move on and get her to come along with you. And the way you do that is you don't give it any attention. Having to have the last word, holding a grudge, taking it, personalizing it, any of the behaviors. So don't do those things that we know are going to actually set people with PWS off. It's so important not to be the person who has to have the last word, or who says stuff like, well, remember last week when no, every day, clean the slate, start over. That is the best way to get them to actually move on. The idea that people often give in because it's hard now. If it's hard now, it's going to be easy later, because your kid's going to know you mean what you say and you say what you mean. If you make it easy now, it's definitely going to be hard later, because kids with PWS learn that people will give in and people will be worn down, and they count on that. So Don't be that person. Do it initially so that you don't have to keep dealing with it. Believe in yourself. If you think you can, you more often will be able to do something than not. So this idea, people say, well, I just don't know what to do with my kid. And I'm like, right, you can tell me that, but you don't tell your kid that, because they're thinking, what? You're the parent. You're the one in charge. How do you not know what to do? Be confident in your skills and practice them daily. So again, be the same person every day, and then find new ways to learn and adapt as you need to. It's really important to think about what works, do that thing, and do it consistently versus changing and going back and forth about things just because you're not sure what's going to happen next. We definitely learn more from them than they do from us. This idea that we're to teach them and to mold them into whatever else, I always say, honestly, they have made me such a more patient and kind and compassionate person than I would have ever been had I not done this job. And as a parent, that's definitely true. You may not always feel that way, but they definitely make you realize what's important, how things work, and what's going to actually work for them. So again, note that they do learn more. We learn more from them than they do from us. And I want to thank all the families that come to see us, all the other people that we get to see. We would never know all these amazing things that your kids do and how funny they are and how creative they are without them basically teaching us those things. So we appreciate that, and I am happy to take questions.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. This is really interesting. We don't have a lot of questions yet, but if someone has a question, just please put it in the chat. There was someone saying that was a good reminder to take care of a self. You have to put on our mask before you took on the child's mask. So that's a good reminder, I think. And there was a question, it's when you have smaller kids and probably older kids, you don't always have the time to do the right thing. And you have to remain calm, and you have to give them time when you don't actually have the time. So what do you do then when you have to go to school or you have to go to job? And
so yeah, that's actually a great question. So the time part is hard, right? So part of it is trying to build in some cushion before those things happen. So like if you know that your kid is slow to get ready for school or you're having a meltdown, just know that if you have lunches packed and some of the other things done, it makes it a little bit easier. But I do think sometimes you do have to kind of give in because you do have to go to work and your kid does have to go to school. But I would say that knowing that if you do that, sometimes the long-term consequences are that they're going to continue to push you and make you kind of keep backing up. So just kind of know that if you know, this idea that you win the battle but lose the war, it's important to kind of figure out what, you know, in the long term, is this going to matter? Because sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it really does. So the school thing, I'm big on having all their stuff packed and done and whatever else. And to me, they should be ready for school before they eat breakfast, because if they get to eat breakfast after they get everything done, it's going to be done way faster. They're going to get it done. If they eat breakfast and they're like dawdling around, kind of going, oh, well, you know, whenever. And it's like, and you're stressing, and your kid knows when you're stressing about time, like being late, they go even slower, right? They're like, nope. So it's important for you to kind of know that that's part of the compromise part, that they're able to get you into that situation. So it's not always going to happen, but sometimes the planning and the anticipating that things may happen makes things a little bit easier.
Okay, so we have another question as well. What is a constructive method to deal with cooking when a person starts bargaining with ingredients and you can't leave the situation to give space because there's food out?
That's actually a great question. And so, you know, in the States, a lot of people don't let their kid ever in the kitchen. That's where the line is drawn. But I do have kids who actually do fairly well. So I would say this, if they're old enough to be cooking, can you put a contract in place? So here are the ingredients, and you can literally have a list. They can circle 3 or they can circle 4, whatever you can live with. And so if it's adults with PWS who can cook, again, coming up with how much, what they can cook with, you have to kind of plan it all out before you ever go to the kitchen. So, okay, yes, okay. And then you say, great, so we've agreed to this. And what will happen if we don't follow the rules? And I'm sure in a group home, there's definitely rules. So whatever the consequences need to be, they need to actually do those things. And so starting the expectations on the front end, that proactive part and not being reactive, will really make a big difference. And I would literally have a menu of all the ingredients, how much, whatever you want to do. And you could even say, if it's something like mushrooms or something that's like pretty innocuous, you could even say, so how much mushrooms should we use? Like a half a cup? Know that they're going to go 3/4 of a cup. And you're like, okay, we can do that. And so idea that you actually don't negotiate when you're cooking, you do it before you're cooking. And so that everyone's agreed to a plan, and then you follow the plan. And when they don't, you go, I'm sorry. Wow, like this isn't working. So they need to know that there's consequences too. You don't have to punish them, but maybe it means they don't cook tomorrow.
How can you help someone to not be so suspicious against their caregivers, who thinks maybe their personnel is stealing clothes, shoes, or something from the person with PWS?
That actually comes up a lot, which is that trust issue, right? So if I trust you, I don't think you're doing things against me. But with caregivers, and usually there's a lot of turnover and people change, and kids with PWS hate that. So I would, again, can you do some initial kinds of goodwill gestures? So the person who's new or whatever else does something to really kind of, and again, it can be sharing a book or a movie or something they like with the adult with PWS. And then I would actually say that for some group homes, we actually talk about, can they have a safe place to lock up their stuff? If they feel worried about it, can they lock it up? And if it's a possibility, I would say it's okay. But I would also focus on the fact that the person with the caregiver loves them, cares about them, wants to take care of them. So you really focus on the positive parts of the emotion relationship so that people start to kind of let go. And once they actually build goodwill and trust, a lot of the suspicions will go away. But you have to do that. And if the person with PWS still feels very suspicious and not trustworthy of that person, not saying often, but every once in a while, they're not wrong. So it's important to kind of know, is the person doing things that aren't so great, kind of thing? And sometimes they are. So just take it with a grain of salt and know that sometimes people with PWS are really good at reading who is credible and trustworthy and who's not.
Okay. Next question. How to deal with stealing of staff things? So you already talked some about it, but yeah.
I think even in this case, I would have staff lock up things. If things are valuable or important to them, I would lock them up. I mean, even in my own office, I have actually one kind of big cabinet, lunches, purses, anything that is valuable goes in that cabinet before we see people. And people always go, that's so crazy. Are they going to steal stuff? I go, well, maybe not intentionally, but I've had people walk off with stuff off my desk because they just go, oh, I love this pen or what, and they don't ever tell me. So I would say staff should lock up things. And again, people with PWS, that impulse control of I want this thing and I must take it, sometimes they can't resist that urge. So know that it's not personal and it's not like they're bad. They just can't resist. And again, they're limited in what they can take. So they're going to take the stuff that's close and convenient and belongs to staff. So I would say lock it up if you can. If they return it, I would have a drop-off box. If they steal something, they can drop it off. No harm, no foul. Let it go. You got your stuff back. You don't need to punish them. It's not a moral issue. It really is an impulse control issue. So look at it that way.
We have unfortunately resorted to white lies. Oh yeah, resorted to white lies, sometimes pressured situations. Now we are kind of trapped. Should we just confess of having lied? Any tips?
So that's actually great. So I myself am totally not above lying to people with PWS. And I say that proudly. I'm okay with it. If they're stuck on something and they can't get unstuck without you kind of saying, I had a young man who was obsessed with, he was sitting in a car with his mom, he's an adult, traffic kept slowing down, and finally it stopped, and it was on an interstate, right? So a really busy highway. And he said, "What's going on up there? What's going on?" He ends up getting out of the car and starts walking through like traffic, trying to find out what's going on. We talked about she could, like, call somebody, the authorities, to find out what's going on and give him an update. And once she started doing that, and I mean, did she call the authorities? No. Does she know what's going on? She has no idea, but she does it proudly and with confidence. So if you can do that, it's okay. But if you get stuck in a lie that you can't keep up, yes, cop to it, say kind of why you did it. And again, try to kind of appeal to their mercy, and then say, "I'm really sorry and I won't do it again," and don't, at least about that thing, right? But it's okay to tell white lies if you're moving them along. They need answers, and they need reasons, and they need to sound legit. So you need to tell them whatever it takes, because often you have no control over that thing. So it's okay to say, "The janitor will take care of that. The thing will fix that. The so-and-so," and move on. Because once you do, they're like, "Right out of my mind. Great. All good." So yeah, whatever works and whatever is going to kind of keep you on good footing with your kid.